"I'd rather die," the captive said when the cowboy paid $3. The sun was beginning to sink behind the dusty hills, casting long shadows over the little town of Dry Creek. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, except for the creak of a wooden sign swinging in the wind above the general store. Horses stamped impatiently in the corral outside, their tails flicking at the flies buzzing in the dry air. It was the kind of place that seemed forgotten by time. A town where everyone knew each other's business, and strangers were always noticed. A lone figure rode into town, the sound of his boots clinking against the stirrups, carrying faintly in the silence. He was a cowboy, tall and lean, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His hat shaded sharp, thoughtful eyes, and his coat had the faint smell of dust and smoke from the trail. He rode slowly, scanning the streets as if weighing whether the town was friendly or dangerous. People watched him from behind windows and doorways, cautious and curious, unsure what a man passing through with no apparent purpose might want. The cowboy tied his horse outside the only saloon in town, a small wooden building with swinging doors. He pushed them open and stepped inside, the smell of tobacco and sawdust filling his nose. The room was nearly empty, save for a few men hunched over their drinks, murmuring quietly to themselves. He nodded politely, but didn't stop. His eyes were drawn to the bulletin board near the door, where notices were pinned haphazardly. One of them caught his attention. A crude sketch of a young woman, her expression anxious and defiant, and words scribbled underneath that read, "Missing. Last seen near Miller's ranch." He frowned and read the notice again. Something about the girl's eyes in the sketch, even though it was poorly drawn, struck a chord deep inside him. He had seen too many injustices on the trail to ignore a situation like this. Without a second thought, he decided he would find out more. Walking down the street toward Miller's ranch, he passed shuttered shops and houses, each telling its own story in quiet ways. The chipped paint, the small gardens, the rocking chairs on the porches. The wind carried faint smells of baking bread and smoke from a distant chimney. It was peaceful, almost deceptively so. But he knew better. Out here, appearances could be dangerous. The ranch lay on the edge of town, a sprawling piece of land surrounded by a high wooden fence. The main house was large but unwelcoming, with paint peeling from years of sun and neglect. Horses grazed lazily in the yard, but there was an air of tension, as if the land itself was waiting for something to happen. The cowboy approached cautiously, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his revolver. Not because he expected trouble immediately, but because he trusted the instinct that had kept him alive on the trail so many times before. As he neared the gate, a man stepped out from the shade of the barn. He was broad-shouldered, with a hard face that seemed carved from stone, and eyes that didn't smile. The cowboy tipped his hat politely. "Evening, sir," he said. "I hear there might be someone needing help here." The man's gaze narrowed. "That's none of your business," he said gruffly. "Move along." The cowboy straightened. "I reckon it is my business if someone's being held against their will." The rancher laughed, a sound void of warmth. "Against their will, huh? You don't know what you're talking about, stranger. Now get gone before you cause trouble." The cowboy's eyes didn't leave the man's face. He could see the tension in the way the rancher shifted his weight, the way his fingers twitched near the belt buckle. There was something hidden behind those hard eyes. Something dangerous, but also something fragile. Perhaps the uncertainty of control over another person. The cowboy knew he had to be careful. "I'm not here to fight," he said quietly. "I just want to see her safe. If she's here, she deserves the chance to make her own choice." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional whinny of a horse. Then, finally, the rancher's face twisted into something close to a sneer. "You want her? You can buy her freedom. $3. That's the price. The cowboy froze, the words sinking in slowly. Birth. $3. It seemed absurdly small, almost insulting. But he sensed it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the principle, the power struggle. And then he heard a voice behind the house, sharp and unwavering, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'd rather die than be bought." The cowboy's heart skipped a beat. The voice was firm, defiant, full of courage and fear at the same time. It was the voice of the young woman in the sketch, and it carried a weight that made the cowboy understand, immediately, that this was not a person to be treated as property. He glanced at the rancher, who shrugged, as if daring the cowboy to call his bluff. The cowboy's mind raced. How could he help her if she refused his help outright? How could he respect her will while protecting her from the man who wanted to keep her confined? The wind blew through the dry grass, carrying the faint scent of the wildflowers that grew along the fence line. The cowboy made his decision. He would pay the $3, not because he wanted to own anyone, but because he couldn't stand by while someone's freedom was threatened. It was a simple act, but one that could carry enormous consequences. The rancher reached for the coin, smirking, while the cowboy's eyes never left the young woman, whose gaze burned with stubborn determination even from where she stood. There was a story here, one of courage, defiance, and the unyielding desire for freedom. The cowboy knew that whatever came next, he was stepping into a situation that would test not just his strength, but his respect for the choices of another human being. As he handed over the money, the sun dipped completely below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Shadows stretched across the ground like silent witnesses to the moment. The young woman's eyes met his, and he could see a flicker of something that might be trust, or at least recognition that he was not her enemy. The night air settled over the ranch, heavy with anticipation. The cowboy understood that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges neither of them could fully predict. But for now, in that quiet, tense moment, a fragile connection had been made. One that could be the difference between life and death, freedom and confinement. And so, with $3 exchanged, a promise unspoken yet understood lingered in the air. The story of courage, defiance, and unexpected alliances was about to unfold. The night was deep and quiet, except for the occasional creak of the ranch house settling in the cool desert air. Inside, the young woman sat on the edge of a rough wooden chair, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, were fixed on the cowboy who had just paid her price of freedom. She did not speak, and that silence carried more defiance than any words could. The cowboy stood a few feet away, watching her carefully. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set, and he knew that her anger and fear were natural. He did not blame her. No one wanted to feel like a possession, like their life could be bought with a few coins. The $3 lay in the rancher's rough hands, and yet they carried a weight far beyond their value. "I didn't come to buy you," the cowboy said softly, his voice calm but firm. "I came to make sure you have a choice. That's all." "Choice?" she said, her voice bitter. "There's no choice here. If you had wanted to help me, you wouldn't have let him put a price on my life at all." "I understand. But sometimes people put a price on things that should never be sold." "I can't change that. All I can do is make sure it doesn't define you. You're not his to control."
Her hands clenched into fists.
"You don't get it. I didn't ask to be rescued."
Can't just trust someone like you because he said it's okay. He took a careful step closer, showing no aggression, only respect.
"I don't expect you to trust me yet. I only ask that you let me protect you."
That's it. No ownership, no control.
Safety! Oh. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. Then, finally, she spoke again, quieter this time. Safety isn't always freedom. The cowboy's eyes softened. Best, I know. But sometimes it's the first step toward it. And you deserve that chance. You don't have to decide right now if you'll trust me completely. Just let me help you get out of here. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the floorboards, as if weighing the words. Her defiance was still strong, but beneath it he could sense the flicker of hope, a tiny, hesitant spark that maybe, just maybe, not everyone wanted to harm her. Meanwhile, the rancher leaned against the doorway, smirking. Bah! See? She'll learn soon enough. $3, that's all it takes for freedom around here? Funny, ain't it? The cowboy's gaze shifted toward the rancher, sharp and unyielding. Freedom isn't something you sell, he said. It's not money, it's respect. You need to remember that. The rancher laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. Respect? Kid, respect don't put food on the table or keep a roof over your head. Money does. The cowboy's voice stayed calm, but there was steel in it. Some things are worth more than money. And I think you'll learn that sooner or later. The woman's eyes followed the exchange, her anger simmering but her attention caught. The cowboy wasn't just talking to the rancher. He was speaking to her, showing her that not everyone would treat her as property. And that was a revelation she hadn't expected or perhaps hadn't allowed herself to believe. Hours passed, the tension thick in the air. The wind outside shifted, carrying with it the faint smell of sage and the dust of the surrounding plains. The cowboy and the captive sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. He could feel her resistance, a wall built from fear and past experiences, but he also sensed her curiosity, a quiet, careful consideration of what freedom might really mean. Finally, she spoke again, her voice low but firm. If I leave with you, I'm not your responsibility. Not truly. He shook his head. I'm not asking for responsibility, and I'm not asking for gratitude. Just let me help you. That's all. You can decide what you do after that. Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was a flicker of understanding. Not trust, not yet, but the recognition that he wasn't like the others.
That he didn't see her as a prize or a possession. That small acknowledgement was enough for now.
The cowboy knew that leaving the ranch wouldn't be simple. The night was dark, and the terrain around the ranch was rough. There were horses, gates, and possibly men who would notice their departure. But he had faced worse on the trail. With careful planning, patience, and respect for the woman's choices, they could make it through the night without harm. He stood and offered her his hand, simple and unassuming. Are you ready to go? She hesitated, eyes scanning the room and the figure of the rancher in the doorway. Set, her jaw set firmly, her voice still defiant. I don't know if I am. But I'm not promising anything. But maybe it's time to leave this place. The cowboy nodded, understanding perfectly. That's all I need, one step at a time. We'll move at your pace. The first step out the door was the hardest. The wind whipped past them, cold and sharp, carrying the faint scent of the desert and freedom. They moved quietly, keeping to the shadows, each step deliberate. The rancher watched them go, his smirk fading into frustration. He had underestimated the courage of someone who refused to be bought, and he realized too late that a single coin could not define another person's will. As they reached the edge of the ranch, the woman's grip on the cowboy's hand tightened, not from fear, but as a silent acknowledgement of the difficult journey ahead.
She had chosen to leave not because anyone forced her, but because she had decided that her life, her choices, were hers alone. The cowboy guided her carefully down the narrow trail, past the grazing horses, and over the rough terrain. Each step was cautious, aware of the danger that still lurked in the night, but also filled with the quiet thrill of possibility. This was not just a journey through the desert, it was a journey toward freedom, toward autonomy, toward reclaiming what had been denied to her for too long. The night stretched on, and the stars blinked down from a clear sky, silent witnesses to their flight. The cowboy and the woman moved carefully, speaking little, listening to the sounds of the night, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of dry grass, the occasional call of an owl. It was peaceful, but fragile. One wrong move, one careless noise, and the entire plan could fail. And yet with each step, the woman's defiance softened into cautious trust. She still held her independence tightly, but she began to see the possibility that someone could care for her safety without demanding control over her life. That realization was both frightening and liberating. The cowboy, aware of her inner struggle, kept his voice low and calm.
You're doing well.
One step at a time. No rush. Just keep moving forward. She gave a small nod, her eyes reflecting the starlight above. Forward, yes. That's all I can do. The night passed slowly, each step a delicate balance of trust, caution, and determination. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the ranch. The first light of day brought with it a sense of hope, fragile but real. They paused on a small rise overlooking the town in the distance. The woman breathed deeply, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs. For the first time in a long time, she felt the stirring of freedom. Not yet complete, but undeniable. The cowboy looked at her, quietly respectful.
Keep that hope. It's yours, and no one can take it from you.
Rasp. She looked back at him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile crossing her face. I will remember that, she said softly, her voice steady. Thank you, but not for buying me, for walking with me. And in that moment, as the first rays of sunlight touched the land, a fragile bond had been formed. Not of ownership or debt, but of shared courage, of respect, and of the recognition that freedom was something worth fighting for, no matter how small the first step might seem. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, burning away the last traces of dawn mist, and the landscape stretched out in every direction in shades of gold and brown. The cowboy and the young woman moved cautiously along a narrow trail winding between rocky hills and dry brush. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet wilderness. The crackle of twigs underfoot, the distant cry of a hawk, the soft rush of the wind. Each step reminded them that danger could appear at any moment. The woman walked slightly behind the cowboy, keeping her eyes alert. She had spent too long in fear and captivity to trust easily, but she could feel a small sense of safety in his presence. It was not comfort exactly, but a recognition that he did not intend to control her, that he did not see her as property or a prize. That alone gave her courage. The cowboy glanced back at her from time to time, his gaze gentle but careful. He did not speak unless necessary, knowing that words could either reassure or distract. Still, he felt compelled to remind her that every step they took together was toward her freedom, and that she was in control of her own choices. After several hours of cautious travel, they reached a narrow creek cutting through the arid land. The water was shallow but clear, trickling over smooth stones. The woman knelt to cup her hands and drink, the cool water refreshing against the heat of the day.
The cowboy stood nearby, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. He had expected that the rancher or his men might follow them, and he knew that vigilance was essential.
"You think they'll come after us?" she asked quietly, still crouched by the water. Her voice carried both curiosity and fear.
"They might," he replied honestly. "But we'll stay ahead of them." We move carefully. We watch each other's backs. And we don't stop until we're safe. She nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. She trusted him, not fully, but enough to continue. And that was all that mattered for now. Trust, like freedom, had to grow step by step. The trail ahead became rougher, strewn with jagged rocks and twisted roots. The woman stumbled once, catching herself against a boulder, and the cowboy's hand shot out instinctively, steadying her. "Careful," he said. "The ground can be tricky here." She met his eyes for a brief moment, a silent acknowledgement of his help.
I'm careful, she said, though her voice lacked conviction.
She wasn't used to relying on anyone, and the act of taking his hand, even briefly, was an unfamiliar feeling. As they climbed higher, the terrain opened to a ridge overlooking the ranch in the distance. From this vantage point, they could see the layout of the land, the fences, and the barn where the rancher kept his horses. The cowboy paused, studying the scene. "We're far enough for now," he said. "But we can't stay here long. They'll realize we're gone soon." The woman's eyes followed his gaze. "Do you think he'll send someone after us?" "Probably," he admitted. "But we have the advantage." "They don't know the land like we do, and we move quietly." "That's all we can do. Stay smart and stay ahead." The descent from the ridge was tricky, and the woman's heart raced as they navigated steep paths and loose stones. The cowboy stayed close, his presence steadying his voice, occasionally offering encouragement. "Desk. Don't rush. 1 foot at a time." Hours passed, and the sun moved toward the horizon. The sky turned a deep orange, streaked with clouds tinged pink and purple. Shadows grew longer, and the temperature began to drop. The desert, once blazing under the sun, now carried a chill that crept into their bones. They stopped near a small cluster of trees, dense enough to offer some shelter from the wind. The cowboy set down a small bag he had carried, pulling out a blanket and offering it to her. She hesitated, then accepted it, wrapping it tightly around herself. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice softer than it had been all day. He nodded but didn't speak. Words weren't needed. The shared silence carried its own meaning, a mutual understanding that they were relying on each other, however reluctantly on her part, to survive the night. As darkness fell, they huddled together under the blanket, the sound of the wind through the trees creating a low, constant whisper. The woman's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Freedom was within reach, but the journey was far from over. She had to trust the cowboy, not just to guide her, but to respect her choices along the way. And for the first time in a long while, she realized that maybe trust wasn't entirely impossible. Night deepened, and with it came new challenges. Distant sounds of animals rustling in the brush made them pause, listening intently.
Every noise was analyzed, every shadow considered.
The cowboy remained calm, moving with practiced ease, keeping her close and guiding her through the darkness. His experience on the trail was evident, and she couldn't help but feel a measure of respect for his skill and composure. Suddenly, a faint noise reached them from the distance, a dog barking far away, or perhaps a person on horseback. The woman froze, her heart pounding. The cowboy placed a steady hand on her shoulder, not to restrain, but to reassure. "Stay calm," he whispered.
"We'll wait and see. No sudden moves." Minutes passed like hours, and the sound faded into the distance.
The woman exhaled slowly, her body trembling from tension and adrenaline.
I thought
they found us, she admitted softly.
they didn't, he said.
And they won't, as long as we stay careful. You're doing well.
Really well.
A small, reluctant smile touched her lips.
It was the first sign of relaxation she had shown since leaving the ranch.
It was fragile, but it was real. She was beginning to feel that freedom wasn't just an idea. It was something she could touch, step by step, with each careful move away from the ranch and toward her own life. The night passed slowly, filled with careful movement and quiet conversation. The cowboy shared stories of the trail, of towns he had passed, and lessons learned from years of travel. The woman listened, gradually opening up, asking questions, even laughing quietly at small, humorous moments. The tension remained, but it was balanced by the small moments of human connection, the realization that not all people were cruel, that some could be trusted. By the time the first light of morning began to show on the horizon, the two had covered several miles. The woman's steps were steadier now, her fear tempered by confidence in her own abilities and in the cowboy's guidance. They paused to rest, sitting on a sun-warmed rock, drinking water from a small canteen, and taking in the view of the open plains before them. "You're stronger than you think," the cowboy said quietly.
She looked at him, uncertainty in her eyes, and said, "I don't feel strong. I feel tired. But maybe I am stronger than I thought." "That's enough," he said gently. "Strength isn't just muscle. It's courage, too."
"And you've got plenty of that." As they resumed their journey, the ranch was no longer visible.
The sun rose higher, casting warmth over the land and illuminating the path ahead. The woman walked beside the cowboy, not behind him this time, her confidence growing with each step. She was still wary, still guarded, but the fear that had defined her life at the ranch was slowly fading. The trail would continue to be dangerous, and the journey was far from over. But in that moment, under the brightening sky, both of them understood something important. Survival and freedom were not just about escaping danger. They were about finding trust, courage, and hope in the darkest of places. And so, side by side, they moved forward into the unknown, each step a testament to resilience, determination, and the growing bond between two unlikely allies, one determined to protect, the other determined to remain free, yet willing to accept help when it mattered most. The sun had risen high over the wide plains, painting the world in shades of gold and green. The trail ahead stretched endlessly, and yet, for the first time, the young woman felt a sense of hope she had not experienced in years. The cowboy walked beside her, not in front, giving her the space to set her pace. She no longer felt like a passenger in her own life, but someone reclaiming it, step by careful step. They had traveled far from the ranch, and the landscape had changed. Rolling hills replaced the harsh, rocky paths, and small patches of trees dotted the horizon, offering shade and a sense of life returning after the long, tense night. Birds sang overhead, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. Everything felt different now, not just the land, but the possibilities that lay ahead. The woman paused by a small stream to refill the canteen and splash water on her face. The cool water awakened her senses, washing away some of the fatigue and fear that had clung to her since the day she had been held captive.
She looked at the cowboy, who waited patiently, giving her time to gather herself. I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly, still unsure of what words could capture the gratitude she felt, or the complicated mix of fear, relief, and cautious trust. "You don't need to thank me," the cowboy replied. "Promise yourself something. Promise that you'll keep moving forward." "That's all the thanks I need." She nodded slowly, thinking about his words. For the first time, she felt a measure of control over her own life. Freedom was not something someone could hand her. It was something she could claim, and she was learning to do just that. But the journey was far from over. As they moved along the trail, the sound of hooves echoed faintly from behind a ridge. The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "We might not be alone," he said softly. He crouched slightly, motioning for her to follow carefully. The young woman's heart quickened, but she trusted his guidance. They moved silently, weaving through the brush, keeping low, listening to the wind, the distant caws of birds, and the faint sound of pursuit. The danger that had once been so close now seemed real again, but it was tempered by the confidence she had gained over the past hours. They reached a small clearing, and the cowboy paused.
We need to act carefully. We can't outrun them on open ground.
But we can use the terrain to our advantage. The woman studied the path ahead, the ridges, the trees, the small rocks.
She realized how much she had learned in just one day. Not just about survival, but about her own strength.
"Lead the way," she said quietly, determination shining in her eyes.
The cowboy smiled faintly.
Follow my steps and stay close. They moved quickly and quietly, ducking behind rocks and weaving through the trees.
The sound of pursuit grew louder, but their careful navigation kept them just out of reach. The cowboy's knowledge of the land and the woman's growing courage made them a team, silent yet efficient, each step building trust and mutual respect. Eventually, they reached a narrow path that led down into a small valley. Here, the foliage was thick, and the trail offered cover from any pursuers. The woman paused to catch her breath, looking around at the beauty of the valley, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the gentle sound of a small waterfall in the distance. It was peaceful, almost magical, and she felt a moment of pure joy, unbroken by fear. "I never thought I'd see a place like this," she said softly. "Almost to herself, a place where I can breathe."
"You deserve it," the cowboy replied.
You fought hard to get here, and you're still fighting. This is just the beginning. Praise. For hours, they moved carefully through the valley, resting only briefly, always alert to the possibility of danger. But as the sun began to set, they finally reached a small settlement, a cluster of houses and a modest inn. The woman looked at it with wide eyes, realizing that this place represented safety, community, and the chance to start over. The cowboy led her to the inn, where a kind-faced woman greeted them. "You look weary," she said. "Come inside. You'll find food, water, and a bed to rest." The young woman felt a wave of relief, though she did not yet fully allow herself to relax. She turned to the cowboy. I owe you nothing, and yet I owe you something. I can't explain it. Psh. You don't owe me anything, he said simply. You owe yourself. Remember that. Live your life on your terms. That's the only repayment I need. She nodded, a small smile forming. For the first time, she felt the weight of fear lifting from her shoulders. She had survived. She had escaped. She was free. And she knew that her life from this point forward would be hers alone to shape. Over the next few days, the woman began to find her footing in the new town. She took small steps toward independence, speaking with townspeople, finding work, and learning the rhythm of daily life. Each step was a reminder that freedom was not just about leaving a dangerous place. It was about building a life, making choices, and claiming one's own path.
The cowboy stayed nearby for a few days, ensuring that she was safe and settled. The bond between them was quiet, formed in shared danger and mutual respect. There was no expectation, no debt, only a deep understanding that their paths had crossed at the right moment.
On the morning he was to leave, the woman approached him.
"I don't know if I'll ever see you again," she said softly. "But
I will always remember what you did."
The cowboy tipped his hat, smiling faintly.
You'll be all right. You've proven that already.
You don't need me anymore. Keep moving forward and don't let anyone put a price on your life again.
She watched him ride away, the dust rising behind his horse, feeling a mixture of gratitude and newfound strength. She no longer feared the world. She faced it with the courage she had discovered within herself. The town around her bustled with life, simple and welcoming. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, the wind in her hair, and the open path ahead. For the first time, she truly understood freedom. It was not a coin, a promise, or a favor. It was the ability to choose, to stand tall, and to live her life on her own terms. And in that moment, she smiled, not at the past, not at the dangers she had overcome, but at the endless possibilities before her. The story of fear and captivity had ended, replaced by courage, choice, and hope. She was free, and nothing could take that away.